So 1954's underwater family adventure movie 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea might just be the pinnacle of Disney's classic live-action output. It was based on Jules Verne's legendary novel and features a classic cast that's one of the best of the 50s, or any decade really. James Mason, Kirk Douglas, Peter Lorre, Esmeralda the Seal. It's a kind of super cheesy Technicolor tally-ho adventure that's been lost to time, unfortunately, which is a bit of a shame because it's basically one set-piece action scene after another. If you've yet to see it, you'll probably still recognise names and sets and scenes from it. James Mason as Captain Nemo, the immaculately designed Nautilus submarine, its Oscar-winning visual effects. A huge spectacle for the mid-50s. Let's take a look.
We're deeper now than man has ever been before.
Giant squid astern, sir.
So in the 1950s, Disney was going from strength to strength, really. Its animated output consisted of a few films you may have heard of. Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, Lady and the Tramp, Sleeping Beauty. But the 50s is also the decade where Disney threw its hat into the live-action arena, beginning with 1950s Treasure Island. Now that film, and maybe Old Yeller aside, the live-action stuff is a bit meh in hindsight, with the exception of this beauty, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, in 1954. It was a French serial by Jules Verne that was eventually published into a novel in 1871 titled 20,000 Leagues Under the Seas. Disney dropped that last S. So here the year is 1868 and sailors are hesitant at going out to sea after reports of a mysterious sea monster sinking several ships. Persuaded to try and discover the truth, one Professor Aronnax and his apprentice Conseil, Peter Lorre, alongside square-jawed harpooner Ned Land, played by Kirk Douglas, head out to sea on a research mission. Now, it's no surprise that they end up on the receiving end of said sea monster that actually turns out to be a state-of-the-art submarine called the Nautilus, which is controlled by hard-nosed Captain Nemo, the great James Mason. Now, taken aboard the Nautilus, Aronnax becomes fascinated by the world Nemo's created for himself and his crew to survive, whilst Kirk Douglas begins to fear that they will never escape, especially after Nemo's true intentions come to light. So one thing that struck me on this most recent rewatch of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is how well written it is. The whole thing, despite being about a sci-fi like submarine with a crazy captain, is delivered like a Shakespearean play, and who better to be spouting some of these lines than the great James Mason.
On the surface there is hunger and fear. Men still exercise unjust laws. They fight, tear one another to pieces. A mere few feet beneath the waves, their reign ceases, their even grounds.
His captain, Captain Nemo, is a single-minded, self-righteous psychopath who's decided mankind isn't really worth hanging around with, and is on a mission to sink as many warships as he can. Mason's Nemo is a widowed, stateless refugee, a survivor of slavery and a mine producing phosphate for war weapons. Now, even though the book was published long before it, there's definitely a Cold War theme running through this film, especially as Nemo seems to be running the Nautilus on some sort of bleeding edge atomic energy source that's never 100% explained, and one that he can't let mankind have access to as it could lead to mass destruction. Surely not. So yeah, there's a very dark streak running through this film, if you look for it. I mean, you don't have to, you can just enjoy the ride beneath the waves, and there's some great underwater photography on shore here, certainly for 1954. The Nautilus itself is brilliantly designed, kind of coming complete with all mod cons, including an enormous organ and a galley full of food, all sourced from the ocean, of course, much to the horror of the ship's visitors.
The cream is, of course, milk from the giant sperm whale. And those delicious fruits you're eating are actually preserves made from sea cucumbers. Eat your pudding, Mr. Land.
I ain't sure it's pudding.
And there's also a great moment, a favourite of mine, when Kirk Douglas and Peter Lorre find and then subsequently lose some treasure on the deep sea excursion they go on, only to find that Nemo has an entire room of it he just trivially uses to balance out his submarine.
You place an absurd value on the cheapest of human commodities. Aboard the Nautilus, we use such baubles for ballast.
Now, I do love Kirk Douglas, so for the most part, I do like him in this. He's the comic relief here, really, which is needed, really, in amongst the serious observations on mankind's decline. And this is also effortless for someone of Douglas's charisma. It's a Disney production, so of course he gets a couple of musical numbers, hilariously fashioning a homemade ukulele out of some items claimed from the sea. He also gets some comedy moments with Esmeralda the sea lion, Nemo's deep sea pet.
Give us a kiss. Your whiskers tickle. Let me see your whiskers. Hey, you ought to shave, honey. You're beginning to look like Nemo. Let's try it again. Come on, let's try it again. There was old man Nemo.
So 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is almost 70 years old, which is staggering because the action still works really well. You can't pretend the effects don't occasionally look dated, but the now famous battle with the giant squid is still pretty impressive considering the limitations of the pre-CGI practical effects. Disney also didn't skimp on some lavish sets, the Nautilus being an early trendsetter for kind of steampunk vehicles and machinery. Now there's a few modern niggles with the movie for sure. I think Jules Verne's original novel had Nemo as an Indian prince, I think. Here, of course, everyone is white, with the exception of the South Sea Islanders, who are, of course, mindless cannibals. And also, outside of the opening few minutes, there's not a single woman in the entire story. So the film was directed by the late Richard Fleischer, whose CV includes Fantastic Voyage and Dr. Dolittle, alongside films like The Boston Strangler and 10 Rillington Place. So it's no shock to see he can balance visual effects with kind of dark, complex characters. Overall, though, 20,000 Leagues has a charm that can be enjoyed by the whole family in that kind of famous Disney way. There was a 1916 version also that I've yet to see, and countless interpretations since. Disney even remade it in the way with the Black Hole in 1979. So for me, though, this version's the definitive take on the story. Disclaimer, I haven't read the book, but I grew up with this film, and I think that you get more and more from it the more closely you look. Its sing-along frivolities and seal dancing are very much pure Disney, but it's Sea Captain who will murder for the greater good, and let's not forget his crew who will obey him till the death, along with its science in the wrong hands themes, elevate it to much more than just a Magic Kingdom attraction. Go check it out.
When the world is ready for a new and better life, all this will someday come to pass. In God's good time.